One quiet afternoon in a small diner on the outskirts of the city, an American family ordered their usual, a plate of crispy golden French fries, just like always. But this time, when the plate hit the table, something was different. There were noticeably fewer fries, the slices thinner, and even the flavor felt off. The father frowned slightly, and the child asked, "Why are there fewer fries today, Mom?" That innocent question revealed a truth few ever think about. The price of a plate of French fries, a dish that seems so ordinary, can be shaped by decisions made thousands of miles away in heated boardrooms in Washington or Ottawa. No one in that diner knew that just a few weeks earlier, the US government had imposed a new tariff on Canadian agricultural products, including frozen potatoes, a key ingredient for restaurants like this one. A seemingly small change, just a few dozen percentage points in tariffs, immediately sent import costs soaring. The restaurant chain had no choice but to cut portions, switch suppliers, or tweak their recipe. And the effects didn't just show up as numbers on a receipt, they materialized as a very real change on the dinner tables of everyday families. From a smaller plate of fries, we glimpse a supply chain in upheaval. That moment teaches us a profound lesson. Trade policy isn't just dry legalese in some distant document. It seeps into every store, every meal, even into a child's memory of what their favorite fries used to taste like. Geopolitics isn't some far-off abstraction, it's alive in the mundane. A single tariff decision can shake the very systems that seemed unshakable between two of the world's closest neighbors. And from that, a bigger question starts to emerge. How could a decision that seems so minor ripple through and disrupt an entire cross-border supply chain between the US and Canada, a system where goods and raw materials have flowed for decades with almost rhythmic familiarity? To answer that, we need to rewind the clock and trace how these two nations built such a unique trade relationship, one where potatoes, milk, lumber, and minerals are more than just commodities. They are vital links in the North American economic and security bloodstream. And that's exactly where our next story begins, the deep-rooted trade bond between the US and Canada, especially in agricultural goods. Centuries ago, when the first Europeans set foot on North American soil, the border between the US and Canada was never a wall of separation. It was more like a great river nourishing both its banks. And from that shared flow, the trade of agricultural goods was born, steady and so familiar that people came to take it for granted. With its vast wheat fields, endless dairy farms, and rich potato-growing lands, Canada became the breadbasket of the North for the American market. In return, the immense demand from US consumers became the driving force behind Canadian agriculture's expansion and modernization. People living along the border often joke, "Today the cow grazes in Canada, but tomorrow its milk is on a breakfast table in New York." It's not just a funny saying. It's a simple truth of the border rhythm, a daily flow of goods crossing over 5,000 miles of boundary that feels anything but foreign. Trucks loaded with potatoes, grain, lumber, or dairy products have become the steady heartbeat of the regional economy. Canadians are used to the sight of long lines of containers heading south, just as Americans have come to see Canadian products as part of their daily lives. But behind those seemingly routine shipments lies a deeper story, one of trust and strategic partnership. When the US and Canada signed NAFTA in 1994 and later the USMCA, they didn't just ink a trade deal. They built a solid bridge between two economies, ensuring that food, raw materials, and agricultural goods could flow across the border like a river with minimal disruption. That connection serves not just economic interests, but the very security of North America. In an uncertain world, the US needs a stable Canada to ensure supply, and Canada needs access to the US market to survive and thrive. Still, this history of trade relations hasn't always been smooth. There have been undercurrents, moments of tension that left lasting scars. Many still recall the prolonged disputes over softwood lumber, where the US accused Canada of subsidizing its industry and slapped on heavy tariffs, prompting legal battles in international trade courts. Or the clashes over dairy, when American farmers accused Canada of erecting subtle protective barriers that stifled competition. Then came steel and aluminum, when the US cited national security to justify tariffs, even against its closest neighbor. Each time, the US-Canada trade relationship trembled like a bridge under stress, and yet somehow that bridge never fell. The reason is simple: both sides know they need each other. The US can't easily replace a nearby, stable, high-quality supply source, and Canada, no matter how much it tries to expand globally, struggles to find another market as vast and immediate as the one next door. That's why agricultural trade between the US and Canada continues, a vital thread that holds strong even if frayed at times by argument or policy shift. Potatoes are a perfect example. This humble crop has found its way deep into the global fast food supply chain. A farm on Prince Edward Island can ship thousands of tons of potatoes down to Boston in just one voyage. Those crispy golden fries served in fast food chains in New York or Chicago often begin their journey in Canadian soil. It's a vivid image of how inseparably linked the two countries are. And because of that deep interconnection, even the smallest policy change can send tremors through the entire system. A few percentage points in tariffs aren't just dry numbers on a legal document. They can become hidden waves rippling through the supply chain, from the icy borderlands all the way to the dinner table. History has shown that every time the US-Canada trade bridge shakes, the aftershocks are felt in daily life, and this time is no different. So what really happens when a seemingly minor tariff decision sets off a massive chain reaction? The answer lies in numbers that may look harmless at first glance, but carry the power to shift an entire market. And that's exactly what we'll uncover in the next chapter. A signed notice at the White House, a few dry lines about tariff rates on agricultural imports from Canada, might seem at first glance like nothing more than a minor technical adjustment in policy. But those very numbers, 30%, 35%, are like stones dropped into a still lake, sending ripples far wider than anyone expects. At the macro level, it's a move of protectionism. The US government argues that imposing tariffs gives domestic farmers a competitive edge. But at the micro level, in every meal, every restaurant, every delivery truck, it becomes an undercurrent of disruption. A box of frozen potatoes that used to cost $22 now suddenly jumps to over $30. That might not sound like much, but for a restaurant chain serving millions of meals each month, that's enough to shake their entire budget. The result, a serving of fries that once cost $3.50 is now $5.25. And customers begin to frown, asking, why is everything so expensive? Businesses are forced to adapt. Some cut portion sizes, leaving customers disappointed. Others scramble to source from Idaho or Maine, but supplies are limited and quality is inconsistent. Some even try changing the recipe, mixing in different potato types to save on costs. But each tweak leaves a subtle difference in taste, one that touches the consumer experience directly. The familiar meal becomes something awkward, missing its old comfort. On a market level, that shift begins to shake trust. Businesses that once confidently locked in long-term contracts with Canadian farmers now hesitate. They no longer know whether the tariffs will stay the same next year, rise even higher, or vanish overnight. Faced with this uncertainty, companies play it safe, scaling back long-term commitments, reducing import volumes, and diversifying their sourcing. In just a short time, a cross-border supply chain that had held firm for decades begins to show signs of fracture. More dangerously, a tariff decision triggers a deeper fear, the fear of policy risk. Natural disasters, pandemics, rising fuel prices, these are variables businesses are used to planning for. But policy risk is different. It strikes without warning, is hard to predict, and no one knows how long it will last. In today's hyper-connected world, policy risk can feel even more threatening than a natural disaster. It causes companies to retreat and turns even the closest trade relationships fragile. All you need to do is look at a plate of French fries to see how this domino effect plays out. From a potato farmer on Prince Edward Island, to the processing plant, to the logistics company, to the fast food chain, and finally to the diner, every link is part of the same circle. And just one policy change, a light touch, can make that entire circle tremble. But what's even more striking is the deeper meaning behind what seems like a simple story. In today's world, tariffs are no longer just economic tools. They've become political instruments, even geopolitical weapons. When Washington imposes tariffs, it's not only about protecting American farmers, it's also sending a message to Ottawa. We set the rules, and you'll have to adjust. And just like that, the crispy golden fries on your plate become symbols of an international negotiation, part of a much bigger game. To truly understand this, we need to shift perspective to a place where potatoes are no longer just crops, but pawns on the chessboard of geopolitics. From a simple story about a meal, we suddenly realize that potatoes are no longer just another agricultural product. They've become a vivid symbol of how trade policy can be wielded as a tool of power. Washington isn't just imposing tariffs to protect American farmers. Behind that move lies a political message to Ottawa. The U.S. holds the power to set the rules, and Canada must adapt accordingly. Those crispy, harmless-looking fries now carry the weight of a far more complex relationship between neighboring nations, where economic interests are tightly interwoven with geopolitical strategy. Canada, long seen as the reliable partner, has built its identity around supplying the U.S. with what it needs: lumber, dairy, minerals, and of course potatoes. But every time the U.S. uses tariffs as leverage, Ottawa is reminded of its dependency. In an instant, those cross-border shipments of potatoes are no longer just commerce. They become symbols of an unbalanced power dynamic. This is the harsh reality of any alliance. The stronger party always has the luxury of testing the weaker one's limits. And yet, Canada isn't simply sitting still. Each blow from Washington pushes Ottawa to explore new paths. In recent years, Canada has broadened its horizons, signing free trade agreements with the European Union, CETA, opening up to Japan, South Korea, and even ASEAN. The moment the US builds a wall, Canada looks for a new door. And surprisingly, even potatoes, a food so seemingly mundane, can become a bridge for Canada to step beyond America's shadow. Frozen potato containers, once destined exclusively for the north-south route, are now being shipped west across the Pacific, arriving in ports like Yokohama or Busan. If this trend continues, plates of French fries in Tokyo, Seoul, or even Hanoi might soon carry with them the story of a strategic shift, proof that Canada refuses to stay confined within America's orbit. When Washington tightens its grip, Ottawa opens another way. And the ripple effect doesn't stop there. Every time Canada opens a new trade door, the global balance shifts slightly. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and members of ASEAN not only gain access to a steady food supply, they also deepen ties with a resource-rich G7 nation. In that scenario, it's the US that ironically risks losing ground. A small tariff policy ends up redrawing parts of the global trade map, handing advantage to players who were once mere bystanders. Potatoes, then, are no longer just a snack. They've become a powerful illustration of how geopolitics operates, from the family kitchen in America to Ottawa's trade strategy and on to global agreements shaping the 21st century. A single French fry can reflect soft power, hard interests, and the tug-of-war for influence in our time. But all of this turbulence brings us back to a deeper question. How can one small change shake the foundations of a system we thought was solid? The answer lies in the nature of supply chains themselves. Like a delicate stream, even a single pebble can alter its course. And to truly understand that fragility, we must take a closer look at the French fry supply chain, where some of the biggest lessons are quietly unfolding. The term supply chain may sound dry and technical, but in reality it's like a bloodstream quietly pulsing beneath everyday life. In the case of French fries, that bloodstream begins in the distant fields of Prince Edward Island, winds its way through frozen processing plants, continues on long-haul trucks that cross the border, and ultimately ends up in those golden, crispy packets sitting on dinner tables in millions of homes. It's all part of one continuous circle, seemingly solid but far more fragile than it appears. When a new tariff is introduced, there's no dramatic scene of borders slamming shut, no containers are instantly blocked, yet an invisible shift begins to ripple outward. Importers grow cautious, distributors scale back their orders, and farmers hesitate to expand production. No one issues a direct order to stop, but everyone, collectively, begins to pull back. And in just a few months, what was once a smooth, steady flow becomes uneven. The heartbeat of the supply chain begins to falter. The danger lies in this. Supply chains don't collapse overnight. They wear down, piece by piece. A processing plant closes due to lack of orders. A logistics company moves on to another industry. A farmer leaves their fields in search of more stable income. Links disappear gradually, and by the time we try to restore the chain, it's no longer whole. The price we pay for what seems like a temporary disruption is often a permanent loss. Potatoes are just the surface. Imagine this same kind of breakdown happening with semiconductors, the lifeblood of the modern industrial world, or rare earths, the key ingredients in green tech and defense systems, or energy, the force that powers our entire society. In those cases, a single policy decision, however small it may seem, wouldn't just change what's on our plates. It could rattle entire economies, it could alter global dynamics. The lesson from French fries, then, is far from trivial. It's a miniature mirror reflecting the massive risks that the world must reckon with. Looking closely, we see that the true foundation of any supply chain isn't just technology, infrastructure, or capital. It's stability. A system only runs smoothly when everyone involved believes that tomorrow will be like today, and the day after won't be much different. Once that trust begins to shake, the entire circle starts to contract, shrinking inward in a move of self-preservation. That is the most fragile truth about supply chains. They survive on trust, not just on contracts or machinery. And it's precisely at this point that the story of French fries leads us to a much bigger issue: the role of trust and stability in the rules of international trade. Because it's not just businesses that need assurance, nations do too. They need to believe that the rules won't change on a whim. When trust is strong, the economic bloodstream flows boldly. But when that trust fractures, even the strongest trade bridges can quietly collapse. That is the deeper lesson we must now explore, to understand just how vital trust is to the very system that feeds, connects, and sustains our world. In trade, people often talk about profit, cost, and market share. But there's one quiet factor, rarely mentioned, yet more important than all the rest: trust. Trust that if I sign a contract today, you'll deliver on time tomorrow, and next week the tariff rates won't suddenly change. That trust is the foundation upon which the entire system of trade is built. Because when the rules stay stable, businesses feel confident enough to invest in warehouses, expand their fleets, and sign long-term deals with farmers. And in that trust, farmers feel secure enough to plant more fields, buy new equipment, and hire extra workers. This is how the flow of goods stays smooth, nourishing entire communities. But when the rules shift too quickly, everything starts to contract. Businesses grow cautious, too afraid to expand in case the policies flip tomorrow. Farmers look out over their fields and worry, will I be able to sell this next season? Investors hesitate to pour capital into cross-border agriculture, fearing unpredictable risks. The short-term gains a government might earn from imposing tariffs often fail to make up for the long-term damage to stability. That was the core challenge Donald Trump faced with his America First strategy, protecting immediate interests for domestic farmers while quietly planting seeds of uncertainty in North American trade. Trust, then, isn't just a feeling, it's a form of soft power in global commerce. A country that upholds stable, transparent rules becomes a more attractive destination than any amount of subsidies could offer. Canada understands this well. Under pressure from American tariffs, Ottawa has been working to rebuild its image as a trustworthy partner for Europe, for Asia, for anyone looking for a safe harbor in a volatile world of supply chains. If U.S. policy creates anxiety with its sudden shifts, Canada wants to offer an alternative, a place where today and tomorrow don't look so different. But trust can't be measured in GDP numbers or growth charts. It's reflected in everyday decisions, whether a restaurant dares to sign a potato supply contract for the next 3 years, or whether a family feels secure enough to count on stable food prices when planning their monthly budget. And when that trust begins to falter, the consequences seep into every corner, into meals, receipts, and the faces we see in daily life. This is where we reach the deepest meaning of trade. It doesn't end at borders or in signed agreements. It flows into every home, every restaurant, every table, where quiet, untold stories unfold each day. From trust and stable rules, we now shift to a more familiar picture, where trade is no longer just numbers on a page, but food on a plate. Policy shifts don't just affect businesses or governments, they ripple straight into everyday life. A restaurant has to change its portions. A customer senses that it just doesn't feel the same anymore. A family pays a few extra dollars for a dish they've always known. And from there, we begin to see clearly. The social impact of tariff decisions isn't some distant abstraction. It's something that knocks on every door, reaches every person. And that is exactly what we need to keep exploring next. On a bustling evening, customers line up outside a fast food chain, each ordering their go-to favorite, crispy golden fries. But their eyes suddenly pause when they notice the portions are noticeably smaller. The young staff member offers a polite, apologetic smile. Import costs went up, so we had to adjust the serving size. It's a simple sentence, said lightly, but behind it lies a much bigger story of how trade policy reaches straight into everyday life. Consumers feel a pang of disappointment, restaurants scramble to adapt, and behind the kitchen wall, suppliers are struggling to keep goods moving. This shift doesn't just end with how the customer feels. When the price of a meal jumps from $3.50 to over $5, families begin to recalculate. What used to be a convenient choice becomes a small burden in the household budget. A family of 4 may now spend dozens of extra dollars each month just to maintain their routine. For those with lower incomes, that difference isn't just financial, it's social. A simple comfort food becomes suddenly a luxury. Behind the scenes, Canadian farmers are feeling the pressure too. Fields once cultivated for export now face an uncertain future. Many farmers are forced to pivot, switching to crops for domestic markets or seeking far-off buyers in international markets, where transport is costlier and risks are higher. Some downsize operations, others leave farming altogether in search of stability. These shifts create a quiet but powerful wave, slowly reshaping the rural landscape of Canada. Meanwhile, restaurants and supply chains in the US are scrambling for creative solutions. Some tweak their menus, introducing new items to take the pressure off potatoes. Others lean into the healthy eating trend, encouraging customers to choose salads or alternative vegetables. These innovations add variety to the table, but they also reflect a deeper insecurity. When even a staple menu item has to change because of a policy decision, customers begin to question their trust in the brands they love. What's most striking, however, is the silence of the consumers. They weren't consulted before the tariffs were imposed, yet they bear the brunt of the impact. A child doesn't understand why their favorite fries are now smaller. A mother struggles to adjust the family budget while still trying to preserve a little joy for her kids. A small restaurant owner sighs over rising invoices. These seemingly small, scattered stories stitch together a much bigger picture. Trade is not just a flow of goods, it is a rhythm of life, a feeling, a habit woven into the fabric of society. And from there, we arrive at a larger question. If a single policy can ripple so deeply into families, into meals, into daily emotions, what does the future of US-Canada relations look like? Will it spiral into an escalating trade war, pulling both countries into a cycle of confrontation? Or might it become an opportunity to reshape a more resilient, flexible trade model for the future? The answer lies just ahead in the choices now facing both Washington and Ottawa. And that is what we'll continue to explore. Looking ahead, 2 roads stretch out before the United States and Canada, both rough, both filled with unpredictable turns. The first path is confrontation. A US-Canada trade war could erupt, much like the one between the US and China. It might be on a smaller scale, but no less fierce. The second path is adjustment, a chance for both nations to learn from the clashes and begin reshaping a trade model that is more stable, more adaptable. Whichever path they choose won't just affect the 2 neighbors, it could send tremors through the entire global economic order. If the trade war scenario plays out, we could expect a spiral of retaliatory moves. The US slaps tariffs on Canadian potatoes, dairy, or lumber. Canada responds with tariffs on American industrial goods, from cars to machinery. Tensions rise, trust erodes, businesses pull back from long-term contracts, investments stall, supply chains break. The heavy atmosphere would feel all too familiar, recalling the US-China trade war, when the world watched 2 economic giants lock into a seemingly endless cycle of retaliation. The difference? This time, the conflict isn't with a rival across the Pacific. It's with a longtime ally just across the northern border. If such a scenario drags on, the damage won't be limited to economics. It will erode decades of hard-earned strategic trust. In a world already unsettled, with the Russia-Ukraine war ongoing and US-China tensions simmering, North America has long been seen as a zone of safety and stability. If that too begins to crack, the image of the entire region will falter, creating room for other powers to step in. In that moment, not only economies, but the region's security architecture could be put to the test. But there is another path, the path of adjustment. After absorbing the shocks of tariff disputes, the US and Canada may come to realize that confrontation isn't sustainable. Instead, they might choose to redesign the rules. Rather than relying solely on massive trade agreements, they could create more agile mechanisms, adaptable by sector, by timeline. Canada, while working to reduce its dependency, could still deepen ties with Europe and Asia. But at the same time, North America could rebuild its cohesion by accepting differences to preserve cooperation. If that scenario becomes reality, we could witness the emergence of a new trade model. Not too rigid, but not entirely free-floating either. A model that balances stability with flexibility, built to withstand global shocks. In such a system, tariffs wouldn't be used as political weapons, but as tools to balance short-term domestic needs with long-term regional goals. The US could still support its farmers. Canada could maintain its vital role in North American supply chains, while also expanding its global reach. And what's important to note is that this choice isn't just about economic outcomes. It's about geopolitical positioning. In the strategic contest of 2025, the nation that earns and protects trust within its supply chains holds the advantage. If the US continues wielding tariffs as a tool of power, it might win short-term battles, but risks losing long-term partners. Meanwhile, if Canada successfully rebrands itself as stable, transparent, and reliable, it could draw new allies from Europe to Asia and turn its dependency on the US into one option among many, rather than the only path forward. Caught between these two futures, the world watches. Because whether it's potatoes or semiconductors, softwood lumber or rare earths, the logic remains the same. Trade cannot thrive on strength and pressure alone. It can only endure when built on trust and stability. That's why this moment between the US and Canada is more than a bilateral issue. It's a global test, a test of how nations will behave in a new era, where power lies not just in weapons, but in the ability to sustain confidence across supply chains. And as we look toward the future, we begin to understand the story of French fries has long outgrown the kitchen. It has become a test of political maturity, of strategic agility, and of regional vision. Will the US and Canada spiral into tit-for-tat retaliation, or will they turn crisis into opportunity and reshape the future? The answer remains unwritten. But one thing is certain, the outcome will not only decide the price of a plate of fries, it will help define the global trade landscape for years to come. A single potato, seemingly too small, too ordinary to carry any meaning beyond a quick bite to eat, becomes, when swept into the whirlwind of global trade, a mirror reflecting the geopolitical logic of the 21st century. From a remote Canadian field to the dinner table where an American child wonders why their fries look smaller today, everything is tied together through a long chain of policy decisions, trade negotiations, and strategic national calculations. A minor change in tariffs might shrink a serving size, but more deeply, it shakes business confidence, redirects supply chains, and can even force a country to rethink its development strategy. The US may gain short-term benefits by shielding domestic farmers, but the cost is a slow erosion of trade trust, pushing partners to look elsewhere. Canada, long in a dependent position, suddenly finds the opportunity to open itself more fully to the world, and in doing so, build the image of a reliable, transparent partner. And in the long run, it is that trust, not brute strength, that determines a nation's place in the global trade order. French fries, a food we often dismiss as trivial, thus become a vivid illustration of soft power. They remind us that power today isn't just found in guns or arsenals, but in the ability to foster stability, earn trust, and uphold fair rules of engagement. Those who master that balance hold the real advantage. And in this shifting global landscape, both the US and Canada now face the same question. Will they choose a path of unpredictability and imposition, or one of trust and resilience? The story of potatoes, then, goes far beyond agricultural trade. It reaches into the daily lives of every individual. It reminds us that politics and economics aren't distant, abstract forces. They are present in the fries on our plates, the totals on our grocery receipts, the expectant eyes of a child waiting for a familiar dinner. That's why understanding global shifts isn't just a task for experts. It's something that concerns all of us, living in a hyper-connected world where every political decision echoes into the everyday. If today's story sparked something in you, leave a comment and let's keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next analysis, where we continue uncovering how the smallest details of daily life can reveal the largest truths of our time. Because sometimes through a single potato, we can see the full scope of a nation's soft power.